Marcos seemed to be making a special plea to local Filipinos. His family has expressed a strong inclination to remain in Hawaii.
I implore the entire Filipino people not to forget these ideals and noble objectives, which we will attain only through the peaceful unification of our people.
When Ferdinand Marcos fled to Hawaii, he and his entourage brought 2 plane loads of goods that included Philippine currency and jewelry. It is believed to be worth millions.
The true vindication of the president and the Marcos family.
His rule changed our country beyond recognition.
Even as millions of their people lived in poverty, the Marcoses enjoyed the good life.
I was no Marie Antoinette.
My country is in crisis.
You sent a tape to the Philippines showing your supporters how strong you were working out with weights.
Because they were saying that I was dead. The people will protect me.
Her husband's heart had stopped. Imelda went rushing to St. Francis Hospital.
How can you find this man dangerous when he is now resting in peace forever?
Ferdinand Jr., nicknamed Bong Bong.
I find myself facing the awesome responsibility of trying to fill my father's shoes.
Mrs. Marcos, do you have any knowledge as to whether you or your husband ever converted to the use of yourself or members of your family any money or property belonging to the government of the Philippines?
We're a copying company. We copy audio tapes, videotapes. I get to be the first to see it in a long time. Often we get their videotapes in boxes and they don't know if it's an old football game or the family's Easter. She's just stonewalling everything. She can't answer, and I don't think she's answered any questions up to this point.
Again, on the advice of my counsel, may I take the privilege against self-incrimination and the right to remain silent.
Even today, I cannot believe Bong Bong Marcos' son is running for president. So it was a perfect time to bring his tapes out and get some fresh, albeit old, footages. This ranks up way up there with some of the most important things we've done. This is historical, especially because of the ties between the Ilocanos and Hawaii.
We will even try our best to protect our president because that is how much we love him.
You either liked him or you didn't.
The Filipino people today have stood up and they'll not be denied of their victory which they have won.
People like me here in Hawaii who were born here, we have no preference, just what our family said, you know, and but other than that, you're either for him or you're against him.
History is not yet done with me. There will be many more things that may actually happen.
Watching all these videos, I'm still that way. I have no clue. Was he a crook? Was he good to the people? Is this a good change? Will Marcos's son Bong Bong be a good president? I don't know.
I know you are all with me in this, and I bid you pray for my success. Thank you and good evening.
Rappler has branded itself as the first social news network in the Philippines. But for us here in the Philippines, it's not unlike any other news group. We are just your typical news group, except that we're much fewer. We have much fewer staff than all the other networks.
So if you don't have facts, you can't have truth.
Maria Ressa of the Philippines, the only woman Nobel laureate this year. She founded the online news website Rappler, which tracked the extrajudicial killings of President Duterte's war on drugs. Ressa has been threatened, harassed, and arrested for her reporting, but undaunted, she's become an outspoken campaigner against disinformation.
If you don't have truth, you can't have trust. Without any of these three, democracy as we know it is dead.
But I think there's just been more spotlight on us since the Duterte presidency, our investigative reporting on the war on drugs, on impunity, on human rights, has I think really struck a lot of nerve in the Duterte government, and that's why we were put into the spotlight.
It's almost 3 a.m. here in Manila, and we're seeing the results of Duterte's war on drugs and his pledge to slaughter all drug users. Police are responding to the murder of a drug user, and we're gonna go see the scene.
When there's something happening here, then you stay here to watch them who is dead.
They're waiting here to see who died, who was killed.
The man was an alleged drug user. They said they shot him in self-defense. It was one of 9 killings across Manila that night. Former police officers say when Duterte was mayor of Davao City, he paid death squads to kill both drug dealers and users.
But I'd like to think we have not done our job any differently than we did before Duterte. We are still the same scrappy little newsroom that does the best it can when it comes to investigative reporting. What happened that night was not normal. We are used to Bongbong Marcos not easily granting an interview or not being accessible. We are even used to having unknown bruises after because the wave or the scrum was really tough. But before, it's just because he's guarded, obviously, and you try to go through that wall of security. But what happened that night was not normal. His media officer kept blocking my hand.
Sir, would you discourage your supporters from doing negative campaigning? Araw! Ang sakit!
Him being inaccessible, we've known that for a time. Going through bodies, we've known that for a time. We're used to it. But blocking a journalist's hand, grabbing her wrist, blocking her phone, and pushing her to a scaffolding, it's unheard of. That's not normal, especially when you're a presidential candidate who's supposed to be talking to the people all the time. And we would like to think as the vessel to the people. And I'd like to say that when you refuse a journalist's question, you're essentially depriving a people's right to know. And that's basically what I was fighting for that night. It's the people's right to know. People have had to break the habit of calling him by his popular moniker BBM because it's Bongbong Marcos. So he's been known as BBM for a long time, and people now are saying let's call him Marcos because when he uses BBM, it's kind of trying to separate himself with the Marcos name or his father or his mother's legacy. But he doesn't keep away from his father.
Scorned at the end, he was hailed in the beginning as a Filipino version of JFK, a war hero first elected president in 1965 who drove criminals out of Manila, brought lights, water, and roads to parts of the country which hadn't had any. But the reformer gave way to the strong man. Shrewd and ruthless, Marcos declared martial law in 1972. Closed newspapers, jailed political foes, turned parliament into a rubber stamp. And all the while millions of his people lived in filth and disease, Marcos and his family lived in glittering splendor. 400 cars, 3,000 pairs of shoes for the ex-beauty queen wife. Land, skyscrapers, and stock literally around the world. A personal fortune estimated at $5 billion. Nearly all of it siphoned from the Philippine treasury. U.S. presidents bankrolled Marcos because he was an ardent anti-communist who let the U.S. keep vital military bases in the Philippines. But when the economy he and his cronies had been plundering collapsed, And when Marcos loyalists were widely believed to have gunned down opposition leader Benigno Aquino, Marcos' legitimacy was finished. Millions rallied behind Aquino's widow, Cory. Much of the military abandoned him.
These were people who wanted to bring down the government, and the government had to defend itself. So that was my understanding. That's always been my understanding of it, and I think it was so, because if you look at the historical record.
Consul General Raul Rabe spent much of the day monitoring news reports from the Philippines. The situation there has left Rabe and 6 members of his staff in limbo. 2 days ago, they signed a statement saying they do not believe Marcos can lawfully claim the presidency. For their action, Rabe and the 6 others were told they would be fired. The pictures of Marcos and his wife Imelda are still hanging.
Scoffing at reports that he had fled the country, Marcos appeared on television with his wife Imelda and their grandchildren and issued the orders that could push both sides over the brink of civil war.
To all the commanders in the field, you are now free to use your small arms to defend your installations and
Marcos said the troops loyal to him should not use tanks and artillery, however, until he issued specific orders for them to do so. As the struggle continues, it's unclear whether Marcos is a president risking a bloodbath to put down a mutiny or a crumbling dictator issuing futile orders.
He still largely uses the image of his father. Many of his campaign promises are to bring back the policies of his father, which he claims are good, but which historians, bureaucrats, and economists have over and over again disputed to be false, that they were not good.
The final hours of Ferdinand Marcos at the presidential palace in Manila. Thousands of loyalists cheering the failing dictator who was soon to be told by his American friends to cut and run.
That was what your Lolo had to do. He felt he had to do that. And that for me, it's something that they need to know about, but it's not something that they need to live, because those are not the issues of the day. I said again, if you're going to serve the people that are your constituency. Don't be arguing with other people about other things that do not help what you are doing, and that's extended now into my campaign. I say, because if we're going to scream at each other and call each other names, how does that help the person who has no job? How will it help the person who is sick with COVID? How does it help the frontliners? How does it help our economy? It doesn't. It's just an argument between politicians.
Hawaii's first couple in Washington Place has embraced Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos in the past. And of course, that has been a point of pride in Hawaii's pro-Marcos community and the subject of some disgust among Marcos opponents here. Would the governor now welcome Ferdinand Marcos as a resident of the islands?
Do you personally welcome Ferdinand Marcos in Honolulu?
As far as I'm concerned, yes, because I think that the alternative would have been a great violence. The President of the United States wanted President Marcos to resign and to leave the Philippines. His presence in the Philippines, I think, would have resulted in a great deal of violence. His leaving the Philippines meant that he had to come someplace. You cannot have him disappear totally. And so the President offered the United States as a place where he could come.
My beloved countrymen, I'm now in Hickam Air Force Base.
With that, Ferdinand Marcos, his wife Imelda at his side, read what he described as a letter to the Filipino people. It contained Marcos's version of his downfall. He never conceded losing control of the country he ruled for 20 years.
This situation came to a point that although I had control of superior military power and several opportunities to employ this military power, the employment of such an overwhelming force, no matter how legitimate, would have resulted in the bloody carnage among innocent civilians.
He says he chose to stay in the Philippines, but the United States made him leave.
Shortly after arriving at Clark Air Force Base by helicopter, I was informed by President Reagan's direct representative that we would have to leave for Guam instead.
From Guam, the Marcos entourage came to Hawaii and Hickam Air Force Base, where they have remained in seclusion. His family has expressed a strong inclination to remain in Hawaii.
I implore the entire Filipino people to not to forget, these ideals and noble objectives which we will attain only through the peaceful unification of our people.
While Marcos says he'll be leaving Hickam once arrangements are made, he did not say when that might be. His decision to remain in Hawaii is a controversial one.
As far as I'm concerned, it's all right. I mean, I'm not against him.
While he's not particularly popular in Manila, maybe, or in the Philippines, he has never shown any indication of anything but a good person when he was here in the past.
I think you should beat it.
You don't want him here?
I don't want him here.
Why not?
Because nobody wants him here.
Oh, it's all right if he will come here.
You don't mind?
Yeah. Because he is a Filipino. And I am a Filipino too, so it's all right if he will come here just to see you.
No, I don't think he'd be safe here. Because a lot of people, I got a lot of friends that they think negative of him, huh? So I might not be too safe.
I don't want any part of anything that crazy to be here in Hawaii.
I wouldn't like to see him move here.
Why not?
He's an evil person.
Would you like to say anything to the people?
We thank them for the support.
I'd like to take a picture. Yeah.
Come on, take a picture.
Exile in Hawaii has been less paradise than purgatory for the Marcoses. Their strange odyssey began with the search for housing, first in Kahala with no luck, then in New Valley at a home far less palatial than the presidential palace. Finally, they would move to Makiki Heights as their home and headquarters in Hawaii. In a perverse way, they would become something of a celebrity couple. Their thoughts, their movements, their ups and downs rarely escape the unblinking eye of the media.
Do you still consider yourself president?
I beg your pardon?
Do you still consider yourself president?
Of course. I've not resigned.
They have a name for themselves, these people who carpooled and rode buses and walked to a street corner in Old Kalihi, where the president of the group Friends of Marcos has a travel agency. They call themselves the Silent Majority, Ilocanos with ties to Marcos's home province in Ilocos Norte, transplanted Filipinos who say they have until now quietly borne the indignities of exaggerated and false reporting about their hero.
No wisdom!
Most media really in Hawaii are all for Aquino, pro-Aquinos, not all for Marcos at all.
The wealthy, sure, that's a president. I mean, who doesn't? President Reagan lives in the White House.
Nobody, how much you poison our mind, we are still loyal to him. He's the best president the Philippines has ever had.
It was a crowd that Imelda Marcos knew would be more than receptive. She wore the same simple dress that she wore when she and her husband faced the cameras for a news conference at Hickam, and she offered herself for press the flesh populism. The crowd surged forward to envelop her in support, to comfort her. And when the crowd pressed too close for comfort, supporters moved to protect her, targeting the big TV news cameras first.
Okay, media, get back!
She was helped onto an old table and the crowd saluted her. She was not there to talk with reporters, but Newsroom 9 got in a couple of quick questions in the highly charged atmosphere.
Ms. Marcos, could you tell me how you feel to be in this country? Homesick. Do you have anything to say to
who feel not as happy as these Filipinos.
Realistically, how would you expect to go back to the Philippines in light of what happened recently with the failed coup attempt? With what support? And wouldn't you be concerned that you would be arrested as soon as you got there?
Of course. And that is why they should allow me to make such arrangements that may be possible without the intervention of the United States government, who states that they cannot help me obtain the agreement with the Philippines because they consider that intervention. But I consider this prevention of prevention of my implementation of the plan to leave the United States for the Philippines as intervention.
Sailed from the port of Manila just hours after the Marcos entourage fled the capital by air. The presidential yacht, rumored to be filled with untold treasure bound for a secret port. But tonight, Ang Pangulo, the president, is back in home port, distinguished by the 777s, Marcos's lucky numbers. And eerily, as CBS News learned on this private tour, still outfitted for the Marcoses to come aboard. Come to the presidential suite, the waiting room with the 4-foot-tall Virgin Mary in sequined gown, the Oleg Cassini slippers laid out in front of chairs in an understated bedroom with mirrors on the ceilings and walls, and haunting pictures of a young Imelda and Ferdinand taken when they represented the promise of the Philippines. In the adjacent presidential office, a hospital bed and medical equipment, including a mobile air sterilizer, ready when Marcos fell ill. One closet is jammed with shirts and sport coats, while another holds books by and about the deposed dictator, apparently on hand as gifts for visitors. One of the books, written by Marcos, Today's Revolution, Democracy. A mirrored staircase leads down to the dining salon, which could accommodate 40 people. The Marcos' personal prayer benches are next to a television set and video recorder. A carved wooden door opens to 8 VIP cabins and a lounge beyond. Here, a gold wall clock hints at the rumored wealth. But the one treasure chest in the room is empty. And that is the way the vessel left port last week, said an officer, in a successful move to avoid the kind of vandalism that hit the presidential palace.
Well, I think the best people who can explain it to them are the relatives who went through it. And we have explained it. We've been explaining it for 40 years already. And, you know, I explained it by saying that the situation at the time was dire.
A nation took to the streets tonight to celebrate its victory. The dictator had fallen, the people conquered his palace. For a generation, it had been the forbidden city in the Philippines. Tonight it was renamed Freedom Park. If you've ever wanted to know what a revolution looks like, feast your eyes on Manila tonight. As troops loyal to Marcos filed out of the palace, they were embraced as converts by the gathering crowd. There was pandemonium as word spread that the dictator was gone. There was bloodshed, very little bloodshed. The day that started with 2 presidents and 2 sides ended with a coming together that mingled prayer and patriotism, which tonight were the same thing. They waved their flags, they kissed their flags. The Virgin Mary was everywhere. They tore down the barbed wire surrounding the palace and fashioned it into crowns of thorns. The stately portraits of the old regime were replaced late tonight by Hollywood-type posters of the new leaders, the new Philippines, starring Corazon Aquino, who tonight spoke with the voice of her nation.
We are finally free, and we can be truly proud of the unprecedented way we achieved our freedom, with courage and with determination, and most important, in peace.
This is about as happy as people can get. This was the revolution that smiled.
When Marcos fled, the palace tapes remained behind, an intriguing and potentially incriminating collection. Hundreds of hours of recorded history broadcast to glorify the deposed dictator. Hundreds more hours of private tape. In many ways, the Aquino murder was the beginning of the end for Marcos, coupled with the economic disaster he and his cronies created. disaster and despair measured by the growing number of people who find their daily bread in the garbage dumps. And that is why this party aboard the presidential yacht will interest the people too. A birthday party last September for daughter Irene, the last time Marcos was aboard the vessel. Ferdinand Jr., nicknamed Bong Bong, governor of the family's home province, is the man in the flashing bow tie. There was food and dancing and live music, including the revelers' version of a song that last year was a rallying cry to feed the poor. This version is memorable for its enthusiasm. Memorable, too, because the former First Family and their friends didn't realize how hungry their own people were. Hungry for political change at the very least. The palace tapes CBS News gained access to are but a fraction of the library and the legacy Ferdinand Marcos left behind.
I was no Marie Antoinette. I was not born to nobility.
Of course, there's no denying we were very comfortable and we were very privileged as the president's children. But my parents would never let us forget that this is not yours. This is from the people. Everything we have, all the advantages that we have gained, any successes that we have achieved, and any comfort or privilege that we enjoy comes from the people. And that's why you have to serve. And so that was well balanced. So of course it was a comfortable life. And of course we were very privileged. But we, together with that, I think it was really very clear to us also that this is not something that we were entitled to. It is something that you had to work for and you have to pay back. It's really true. I'm not talking about material things. I'm talking about effort. I'm talking about thought. I'm talking about commitment. And they were right. And so it was very clear to us that we were very, very lucky.
Can you help me understand it?
Happy Valentine, my eternal love. Let me see the stars in your eyes, and not the tears of pain and hopelessness, nor the self-fulfilling wish for death.
How do you feel when he writes you things like this?
Well, you feel more inspired to give more, to love more, and to do the right things and do things beautifully. This is so priceless, and yet it costs nothing. But it costs everything also because it comes from his heart and comes from his hands.
So these are gifts that are important to you?
Oh, it's most important. It's the reason why life is worth living. Love. If it was for material things, that's not what makes life.
Then why have you been so criticized for being, materialistic, or as you pointed out, extravagant? Why do people say that then?
I am a believer that the only things you keep are those you give away. In the deepest sense of the word, of this statement, I always believe that what is the other word for extravagance? Giving. But what is the other name for love? Giving, serving, working. The opposite of love is not hate. It is selfishness when we do not give, we do not serve. And yet, here I am. I love because I gave, and I am crucified for being extravagant.
People power becomes panic at the palace gate. A mad rush to get in and see what Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos left behind. Today was the day of the poor. Manila's slum dwellers summoned by President Corazon Aquino to see the extravagant lifestyle of the palace. Aquino has refused to live there.
It is really sad
that the previous occupants neglected the needs of the Filipino people.
They reflected a life of both privilege and physical pain. Among the luxurious furniture, there is a hospital bed and equipment that Marcos needed for treatment of a reportedly incurable kidney disease. His wife, Imelda, joined him at his bedside for this picture. Marcos was as secretive about his illness as about his wealth. Some documents were found at the palace apparently relating to secret overseas real estate deals. These and other photographs were taken by Time photographer Robin Moyer. Imelda Marcos took with her a magnificent array of jewels, but left behind part of an enormous collection of clothing, cosmetics, and perfume. Marcos' official salary as president, $5,700 a year.
But there is nothing deliberate about Imelda, because I don't operate from just the rationality of my mind or my intellect. I live through the rationality of my heart. So they say I'm quite unpredictable. I'm like an unguided missile. But who can detect the feeling of one's heart?
Put it this way. Even my father, I don't think would object if I say she's the supreme politician in the family. My father is the statesman. He's the political genius. He's the all that. My mother can connect with anyone, from her classmate from I don't know how many years ago to the person working in the palenque, to Gaddafi, to the Queen of England. So anything that happens in politics, we always ask her, what do you think? Is this a good idea? Should we do it like this, or should we wait? Or I can say that I learn something new every time I talk to my mother. I always learn something new. And so yes, she has always a very big influence on everything.
I want to ride through the range where the west commences. Days out and moonshine, lose my senses. Can't look ahead, I can't stand fences. Don't fence me in, oh baby, don't you fence me in.
The size of the audience isn't all that's changed. These days, Imelda Marcos receives her guests in an ordinary 3-bedroom house on the beach in Honolulu. The palace guards have been replaced by watchmen in jeans. The faithful bring handouts of fruit and vegetables, gratefully accepted by the former First Lady, who wears her professed new poverty like a badge of honor.
Thank you so much.
Let's clear this up. How much money do the Marcoses have?
This I know now. We don't have money. We have never been as deprived as in our lives as now.
We heard there were 10 to 15 Swiss bank accounts.
I wish it was true.
No money in Swiss bank accounts.
I have no money right now.
But in Swiss bank accounts, frozen or unfrozen?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
Let me show you what we were given by the head of the commission investigating your wealth. It's a contract with a Swiss credit bank, and you have a false name there, Jane Ryan, that you can sign.
This is what they've been looking at. It looks like this has been a forgery.
This is a forgery?
Yes.
But whatever Mrs. Marcos says, investigators for the Philippine government say this document, and dozens of others taken from the palace vault, prove that the Marcoses had more than 15 accounts in 6 different Swiss banks, with total assets of more than $1 billion. Though the money is frozen now, and Mrs. Marcos complains bitterly that she and her husband are reduced to paupers. It's a long way from the days Imelda Marcos was a power to be reckoned with in the Philippines. She held the titles Governor of Metropolitan Manila and Minister of Human Settlements. She controlled a lot of government jobs and government money. As for her money and her taste, by now almost everybody's heard about the opulent bedroom, decorated in the style of Marie Antoinette. Not to mention the row after row of expensive dresses and the famous shoes. Nearly 3,000 pairs of them.
I have no weakness for shoes. I wear very simple shoes, which are palm shoes. It is not one of my weaknesses.
That's what she told us the first time we saw her. She said that the 3,000 pairs of shoes now in the Palace Museum belong not just to her, but to her daughters and the maids and the nurses at the palace. So when we stopped by on our way back from Manila, we asked her if she and the maids and the nurses all wore the same size. But they're all size 8.5.
No. No.
That's what they say at the palace.
No, we have to look at that. I am positive of this. I am sure there has been a lot of tampering, just like what they did with our documents. There was a lot of tampering on our papers. For that matter, I'm only 8.5, only about a year ago. I used to be 7, size 7. So if it is all 8.5, that's a little questionable. I'm sure I don't have 3,000 pairs.
She's missing, very much visibly missing. Their children explain it like because she's old. That much, but some political analysts are seeing it as maybe they're also trying to separate Imelda from Bongbong because Ferdinand Marcos Sr. at least has the intelligence thing going for him, whereas Imelda is the image of excesses. When you talk of the excesses of the Marcos family, buying all that real estate in New York, buying all that jewelry, buying all that shoes, and all of that past interviews where she unapologetically says, I would like to cover the ugly side of Manila by building a very beautiful mansion. That's all Imelda. And maybe they want to hide that and sidetrack Imelda the excessive from Marcos, who brands himself or sells himself as a pro-people candidate who understands what the people need.
What will they write about you? What will they say about Ferdinand Marcos?
Oh, they will write all kinds of things. But the historian will probably research on the figures that cannot tell a lie.
What will they say? Will they say
like, for instance, by how much did Marcos increase the gross national product? I mean, it's 5 times. What are the figures here? And what happened after Madam Aquino took over? The production went down to 20%, 1/5 of the production under Marcos.
Very much looks like his father, really. He's like a splitting image of his father. He can't really separate himself from his father because that's where his strength comes from. They're voting for him because they're voting for the father.
Bongbong tayo! BBM! BBM!
Bongbong Sara! Bongbong Sara!
Never steal, which is we believe in that. We believe that Marcos, if Bongbong Marcos come out and Sara Duterte, they both go together as a politician, president and vice president, I know they can run a good country. And we know they're not going to steal money. We know they're not gonna sell Philippines behind the Filipino people.
How do you know that?
We can tell. We've seen a lot of projects from Marcos. Those bad criticism, no, you don't believe. They just want to ruin Marcos and Duterte. But believe me, if you vote, both of them, as a president, Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte, you guys in a good hands. We believe that.
A lot of people here in Hawaii share this. We don't have the same views because number one, a lot of people here mostly are coming from the region where the Marcoses come from. And believe, you talk to them and they just say, yeah, he is the best president ever. But history tells us that the government was not the golden years of the Philippines during that time.
Ferdinand Marcos would end his days a frail figure, a shadow of the man once feared as dictator of the Philippines. For dictators and Democrats, saints and sinners, debt bears final witness to their deeds. History serves as final judge of their souls.
You sent a tape to the Philippines showing your supporters how strong you were working out with weights.
No, because they were saying that I was dead or I was dying and that I was incapable of running a government. That's about all.
So it wasn't in any preparation for your return there?
No, the return is a separate matter. I don't need to show that I'm exercising. I merely wanted them to know that all these lies about my health certainly don't hold water.
Imelda Marcos was wrapping up an interview yesterday when she got the call. There was another crisis. Her husband's heart had stopped. Imelda went rushing to St. Francis Hospital.
So much to be done in all fronts, for country, for your home, for your needs, for your health.
By the time she got to St. Francis, Ferdinand Marcos was on an internal pacemaker. His condition seemed to stabilize, raising the possibility that he would once again rally. But as the evening wore on, hope began to dim. Doctors said kidney and lung failure and a widespread infection added to the cardiac arrest that led to Marcos's death. That came shortly after the arrival from California of Marcos's son, Ferdinand Jr., who's known as Bong Bong.
When Bong Bong arrived, I think he felt that his son was there, so he opened his eyes. And after opening his eyes, that was it.
We do find ourselves at the end of an era. And as one chapter closes, another one opens. And I find myself facing the awesome responsibility of trying to fill my father's shoes.
Good afternoon, it's 12:58. You're on KISS AM Radio. It is true, and a lot of people have been in shock about what has happened over the last 8 to 10 hours.
This radio station is the only one here that caters to Filipinos. And today its switchboards lit up. Some people were angry that the flags at the Philippine consulate will not be flown at half-staff.
Since President Marcos was the sixth president and Aquino was only a senator, and they did that to Aquino, why can't they do that to ex-President Marcos?
Some say his body should be allowed home.
Can we do something about it, or we cannot do nothing? Here in Hawaii, we cannot do anything about it.
In Tagalog, this caller says, I used to hate Marcos, but now he's dead. We should forgive him. Let him go home.
Earlier call, one lady wanted to dedicate this song to the former Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, and this is a song by Imelda Marcos, Gaano Ko Ikaw Kamahal.
His rule changed our country beyond recognition. In what ways he changed it, I leave to others and to history to describe. For such a loss must transcend for his family, mere politics and history, and the mere opinions of men and women. No one should trench on the dignity of this painful moment in the life of a family. I personally condole deeply with the family he leaves behind, with all sincerity, for I and my children know the pain of such a loss.
Imelda Marcos now stands alone against criminal charges for allegedly looting her country of billions. She will vindicate herself, she says, once she resolves a long-standing issue of whether Marcos's body can return to his homeland.
How can you find this man dangerous man to security when he is now resting in peace forever?
Arrangements are in place for the arrival of the remains of the late President Ferdinand Marcos. Despite hostility in much of the country, Marcos is revered in the northern Philippines. Supporters predict that tens of thousands of people of the northern provinces will extend a hero's welcome to their favorite son, who was toppled under a popular revolt in 1986. President Fidel Ramos agreed to the family's request that the remains be buried in the Philippines, but only on the condition that the body was to be flown directly to Ilocos Norte, the home province of the one-time dictator. Hundreds of Filipinos filed past the coffin this weekend in Honolulu before it was flown to Guam on its way to the Philippines. His supporters remain loyal, despite charges he looted the Philippine treasury during his 20 years in power. There is even a cult in the Marcos home province devoted to venerating the former dictator. Cult members believe him to be a god, and they manifest the sentiment to his widow, Imelda Marcos.
Ferdinand will come, and this will be the beginning of true unity and reconciliation.
Walk tall, walk proud, with your head held high, for you have fought for the greatest cause that any man could ever know. And you have fought that fight with its greatest champion. You who loved him, family and friend, weep not, for you sat at the feet of a man touched by God.
It is traditional in the Filipino family that the eldest son take his father's place. I can only tell you, at the risk of some presumption, that as the head of the Marcos family, personal and political and professional, we shall always continue to stand for what he stood for. We will always stand for stability, development, justice, and unity and nationalism.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As I speak to you today, the Philippines faces one of the greatest tests in its history.
I think that's where the brilliance of the tagline unity. I think it's all a culmination of years of rehabilitating the image. Because when you have a very divisive figure like Bongbong Marcos, you can't run a presidential campaign and still keep that divisiveness. That's why I think unity is very brilliant. Of course, at the beginning, we were all, just laughing at it. Like, how can you campaign on a promise of unity? Unity is not a platform. And when he launched his candidacy in February, his speech doesn't mention any platform, but mentions the word unity 21 times.
Because of their belief in our message of unity, because of their belief in the candidates.
In plain sight, we were able to see the shift, historical revisionism, a denial of the past, and his campaign is on unity, when ironically the information operations that has brought him forward has actually targeted his opponents, has seeded meta-narratives that are lies, when he wins, he will determine the future of this country, but simultaneously, it's past.
Sir, how do you feel after voting? How do you feel? Hello, sir.
How confident will I be? I'm confident that I will work with every iota of my being to make sure that we are working towards unity, to unify the country. That's important so that people understand, because what is a culture? A culture is a shared consciousness. And until you have a shared consciousness, then you don't understand the culture. And if you don't understand your culture, you don't know what it means to be Filipino or to be whatever it is. And that's the first part that you have to understand.
I am glad that we were exiled and brought to the United States, because I know that there may be some may be unjust, oppressive, and tyrannical, but I know that the foundation of this country is freedom, justice, and democracy. And I am glad and I thank the Lord that we were exiled here, because here in America, there is hope for freedom, there is hope for justice, and there is hope for democracy. If we were exiled somewhere else, maybe we would never even go home. And from what we know, the President and I and the entire Marcos family will soon go home.